I'm Kevin Oliver, and that's my lovely wife, Dara Oliver.
Hello.
We were hoping to travel up to North Dakota and Medora for the gathering of Roosevelt's, the Chautauqua, and see everyone. But in 29 years of being in the airline industry, I have not seen a day like today. So we spent about 9 hours at the airport, and all was lost on trying to go from Florida to North Dakota today. So unfortunately, we won't make it this year. We hope to see everybody again next year, but we had put together a historical skit. So we'll try to send that to you today, and maybe there'll be a little bit of information you can take away from it, and maybe a little bit of laughter also. So thank you so much, and hopefully we'll see you next year. Bully.
God bless.
Well, hello, dear Edith. Good afternoon. How have you been, dear?
I've been good, Theodore. You need to come inside. I do not want you to get a deathly cold. It would be horrible. You wouldn't be good for the free world or for our children on this New Year's.
Oh, you're right, dear. It is awful chilly outside on this New Year's Day of 1907. But I've been having bully fun, shaking the hands of all the people of this great land that have made their way to Washington, D.C. on this brand new year of 1907.
I have noticed you have been shaking a lot of hands.
Oh, that I have. I've just recently been told, dear, that I have actually shaken 8,500 hands today. Isn't that amazing?
That is.
Oh, it was delightful.
It reminds me that you are a beloved president as well as the center of attention.
No, sometimes.
Much like our daughter Alice says,
Hmm?
that you must be the baby at every baptismal,
Huh.
the bride at every wedding,
Hmm.
and the corpse at every funeral.
Well, I hope that she's wrong at least about the latter. She does have a sharp tongue about her occasionally. You will agree to that.
Of course.
Well, dear, I think I will take you up on coming in and maybe having some tea and sit for a while. My hand has not been this sore since I was in the Dakota Territory and I had to knock out a big cowboy up there. Have I ever told you that story?
Yes, Theodore. Many, many times. He was shooting his guns and his mouth off.
There he was.
And I believe he called you Four Eyes. Was it in Mingus?ville?
Well, dear, it was. Actually, at the Nolan Hotel in Mingus?ville. I went in there, it was a cold night, and as I walked in, he had 2 6-shooters, one in each hand, and he was firing them down at the clock. And as he noticed me, he said, "Oh, Four Eyes here is going to buy me and everyone else a drink," as I walked in. So I crept in, trying to get away from his attention, and I got behind the stove and I bent down. But he did notice me and came over.
So I presume that as you stood up, you knocked him out.
Well, it wasn't quite that easy, dear wife. As I arose, I said, "Well, if I shall, I shall." And as I got up, I peered over his shoulder at the very clock that he'd been shooting at. And as I looked at it, he turned his head to see what I was looking at. And at that precise moment, I hit him a right, and I hit him a left, and I hit him a right again. And as he fell, both pistols discharged. I do not really know if he was actually trying to shoot me or it was involuntary movement on his part. But his head slammed on the bar, and he knocked himself unconscious.
And then they dragged him out, and everyone cheered and revered you.
Well, dear, they did. They actually, hurrahs went up because I guess he was the town bully, and I had just knocked the town bully unconscious. They removed him to a shed out back behind the hotel. And I was told the next morning he was gone. Nowhere's to be found. Presumably getting onto a train in the middle of the night. Never to be seen again in that town. Well, you know, dear, I'm just thinking about it. Maybe later on this afternoon, if you have the time, I can sit and tell you that story again in greater detail. Wouldn't that be jolly?
Theodore,
Yes, dear?
I don't think I'll have the time.
Oh, that is so sad. But then again, dear, you do have our children to raise, and you've been doing a fine job at that. And then more than that, you've been working on the People's House, the White House. You have renovated this whole White House and made it a fine, fine place for us to live and future presidents to live in.
Yes.
Well, dear, I will tell you then a story that just happened to me just a few minutes ago, right outside that door. As I was shaking all the hands of these people across this great land, a gentleman seized my hand and had a firm handshake. And as I looked him in the face, I recognized him. Dear, do you remember the captain of the USS Maine?
Yes, I believe his name was Captain Charles Dwight Sigsbee.
It was Sigsbee. Oh, dear, you are not only beautiful, but you are well-read also. Oh, Sigsbee was the knight. He was a captain on the USS Maine. That fearful night in the Havana Harbor in 1898. And that poor man, he had under his command that night 355 souls. Sadly, all were lost except for 94 survived. That night was the inspiration for my men from the first volunteers, the Rough Riders, as we charged up Kettle Hill and later on San Juan Heights. San Juan Hill, we took that. And my men, they would scream at the top of their lungs. Oh, I can hear it now. Remember the Maine, the hell with Spain. What a fine, fine moment that was, dear Edith. Well, alas, I'll tell you the story he told me that I'd never heard before. That very night, about an hour before the explosion, he was in his quarters. And he had asked his cabin boy for some tea. And the cabin boy brought the pot of tea. And as he drank his tea, he was filling out a report to me. I was the Assistant Secretary of the Navy at the time. Well, needless to say, I never received the report, but I don't blame the dear captain under the circumstances. However, later on, after he finished that report, he wrote a letter to his dear wife. And sadly, after that letter was written, he was pouring himself another cup of tea, and the explosion rocked the ship, stem to stern, Edith. And he rushed out of his cabin up on deck. He was in the aft part of the ship, and as the bow of the ship plunged under the waves, fire racked the ship. People were screaming. Men were jumping overboard. And sadly, his cabin boy was one of the ones who perished. It's very sad. He was a young chap. However, Sigsbee tried his best to save that dear ship and to save his men. But he was ultimately had to abandon ship. He was the last to step off the USS Maine onto a lifeboat. Well, dear, he reached in his pocket and he pulled out this spoon. And he said to me, Theodore, in all the excitement, I had never let go of this spoon. This is the spoon, dear, from the USS Maine. You'll be able to read it right there.
So Captain Sigsbee gave you the spoon off the USS Maine.
No, dear Edith, he actually just gave me the spoon to present to you because he knows of all the fine work you've done in our house, the White House. And he knows that you and I like to have tea in the afternoon, and we like to read. And he said, Theodore, when you and Edith are having that tea, I hope you remember those brave men that gave up their life for the betterment of America. Bully!